Hello everyone, and welcome to week 5 of social media analytics and email campaigns. And this week we're getting into the email campaigns. We're doing our email marketing introduction. So what will we cover? We'll cover email marketing tools, and CASL compliance. So what is email marketing and what currently counts as email marketing? So specifically, email marketing is the act of sending a commercial message, typically to a group of people, using email. However, now we're thinking a little bit more broad because CASL is in effect. And we're going to get into the specifics of how to abide by the new laws and what types of messaging and email count under CASL. But more broadly, we need to start thinking about email marketing as including even emails sent from one individual to another individual, depending on the content that is in that email. So why do we use email marketing? It's definitely useful in B2B and B2C, and I think we've all had our own personal experiences either on the marketing side or on the consumer side, seeing the value of email marketing. So be it if you are subscribed to a store that you really like, or maybe it's a newspaper or magazine or a source that you like following. And then from a B2B perspective, it's incredibly helpful to keep, clients up to date or, different partnerships alive without having to constantly be in touch with each other. So there's so many different values. We could probably spend hours talking about in every single industry the value of email marketing. But there's a lot of information in every single one of those areas of business that speak to the success of this type of marketing. The ROI in particular is very high in email marketing, and when you look at the stats every single year and year over year, and you compare the results coming from email marketing versus the results coming from, let's say, social media, the results in email marketing continue to rise because you're getting direct access to your consumer because they've allowed you into their inbox. They're giving you more of their attention because they're giving you direct access to you. Especially as social media, the game gets increasingly harder as platforms like Facebook and Instagram make reach more difficult to gain. Email marketing is a really great way to get right into somebody's inbox and get right to directly contact with them. So I definitely encourage everyone to try and find opportunities to see if it will work in your marketing strategies. Customer retention is a very big area for email marketing. A lot of lead generation strategy is based and maintenance, is based on email marketing. If you look in the real estate world in particular, a really big marketing tactic for them is gaining the email addresses of as many people as possible, running a drip campaign, meaning they receive emails at scheduled points or based on the consumer's interaction with the email. And it's a really easy way to retain them and maintain engagement and a relationship with, once again, without one person having to contact them personally every single time. And this is common in many different fields, but real estate came to mind because they're very big on this type of strategy. And for most people, email is the preferred communication method. And that's across a lot of different age groups, which is really interesting. It'll be even more interesting to see what happens with a generation like Gen Z and see what they prefer when they grew up with social media platforms. And that was a really big point of engagement for them. But specifically millennials and everybody older, some of our first online interaction was via email. And specifically from a professional and marketing perspective, our experiences with email. So since it is such a preferred method of communication, we should be all trying to take some opportunity to engage with our potential clients or customers in that way. And of course, if it makes sense for your business, don't get me wrong. Don't try to, force a square peg in a circle hole. If somebody remind me what that expression is supposed to be in the discussions. Talk about why we would use an email marketing tool. For me, and I think for a lot of marketers, one of the best parts about using a tool is it supports making sure that you're CASL compliant. Tools like MailChimp, for example, have really got it down to a science that they make sure that their users are putting in all the information that they need and building the right kind of forms to make sure that you're complying by these laws and legislation. Keeping up with the privacy laws, becomes a task in itself. But what's great is that these tools like MailChimp and the others that we'll discuss in the next lecture, they store all the information you need in order to make sure that if it ever came down to you having to provide that information and to prove that you've been keeping track of that information, you have been abiding by the privacy laws. And, we've all gotten into these really great discussions about bots in the other week's story. And I think the overall consensus was that we appreciate bots and innovation when they can automate part of a process for us, meaning that it's one less thing that we have to do. And, these tools really do automate the process. They help you with design. They help you with finding the right time to send it to your list. They store all the information. All of that is automated for you to make that marketing process so much easier for you. I also love them because they're professionally coded. It'd be great to have a coder and a designer working with you at all times, but that's not always accessible, meaning these platforms that are out now, they offer designs that you can use. The coding is done for you. All you have to focus about is the content and the message you're trying to bring across to your subscriber. The testing abilities continue to get better and better. It's absolutely fantastic, the amount of data that you can get back from launching an email campaign. You can see what links were being clicked, who literally, based on their email address, was clicking those links. You can see when people were opening your email, what the open rate was, the click-through rate, of course. All this type of data that just makes you a stronger marketer when you get to act on that information and make better strategic decisions. Segmentation is something that we actually get into in the next lecture also. Segmentation is when you take your list and you break it into different groups. So you can have one overarching list, and let's say it's like all of your customers from 2017, but then it's broken into categories, maybe by demographic data, so maybe their age or their location. Or you can segment even further. So back to the idea of a drip campaign, you can segment based on, new subscribers, and they get a certain email. And then after a certain point, they're no longer a new subscriber, so they get put into a different group. And that can all happen automatically if you're working with the right tool for your business. But it also means that you can create messaging very specific to certain audiences. And that will greatly increase the results of your campaign. So I'm really excited to talk about segmentation because there's just so much to be gained in that category. So overall, those are the reasons why we use tools, and that's why it's going to be really great to get into them so I can show you a lot of these different pieces working together. So let's talk about CASL compliance, and I just want to note this does not constitute legal advice. This is based on my understanding of CASL and the research that I've done and the resources that I have access to. I definitely recommend you have to do your own research and make the decisions that make sense for your business and make sure that your business is complying with CASL. If it gets to a point that you're dealing with a trickier sort of marketing plan and you're going outside of maybe Canadian borders, and we'll get into a little bit of that, you will need to go and seek out the advice that you need. So what is CASL? Canada's anti-spam legislation. So this came into effect in July of 2014. So what's great is that at this point, 4 years out, we have a ton of information to help guide us and to make sure that we're following the legislation. It applies if you are a Canadian or your recipients are Canadian. So if you as a Canadian marketer or working for a Canadian business are creating an email marketing campaign, it applies because you are in Canada. So sorry, not just that you're Canadian, if you are in Canada. But if your recipients are in Canada, so if you are advising a client that is elsewhere or a business that is elsewhere and they want to be in touch with people living in Canada, then it applies also. So it applies to any commercial electronic message. So we're going to get into literally what that means in the next slide. The Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission, so known as the CRTC, has the primary enforcement responsibility. And what's great about that is they've created resources. I linked to two in the presentation. They're also in the additional resources document in the folder that you can go ahead and access. For example, these infographics are great for you to review. It's great to go and just check in on, brush up on, make sure you understand it. But they have put together a pretty reasonable amount of resources for us to go and make sure that we are abiding by CASL. So what counts as a CEM? Any message in electronic format. So what does that mean in terms of literal examples? So this is something sent to an electronic address. So that could be an email address. That could be a text message. That's why if you receive text messages from a business, at the bottom it'll say something like, if you wish to unsubscribe, text back saying stop or unsubscribe. This also could potentially count with social media messages depending on the content of your message. So if your message is in electronic format and it contains a marketing message and you are sending it to an electronic address, it is a CEM. So what counts as a marketing message? It is any invitation to take part in a commercial activity. So that can mean if you message someone, encouraging them or like pushing them towards a sale online for your business. It could mean if you're trying to sell them on any sort of product or commercial activity. A CEM has to have these three pieces, that it's a message in electronic format, it's sent to an electronic address, and it contains a marketing message. If you are messaging somebody about something personal, but you happen to be, emailing them from your business address, that doesn't count. It's a personal reach out. But if you have a link in your signature pushing for the sale of an item, let's say, then that could be counted as a CEM. So I really do encourage everybody to go through the additional resources to see the examples. But as long as you remember that you should be, concerned about CASL, as long as you are putting together a message in an electronic format and you're sending it to an electronic address and it contains a marketing message, then you're good, because you then at that point can do your checks and balances and make sure that you're following CASL. So what is required to send a CEM? Legally, that's what we're talking about here. Consent from the recipient, be it implied or expressed, which we'll get into in the next slide. Identification of the sender, and subscribe mechanism. So we'll get into the last two just overarching really quickly here. So that means that it has to be clear who you are and the business that you're contacting them from. The unsubscribe mechanism, we're going to get into the specifics of that too, and what counts as a proper unsubscribe mechanism to the CRTC under CASL. But there has to be a visible unsubscribe mechanism that is easy for the receiver to act on. So let's talk about implied and express consent. So for implied consent, this counts as a business deal done in the past 24 months, so in the last 2 years. A charity or government and the recipient donated, volunteered, or attended the event. So if somebody came to a Sick Kids charity event, they could be reached out to from Sick Kids. A professional message sent to a publicly available address. So if a website has an info at email address and you reach out to them there, that is implied consent. An existing business / professional or personal relationship. So at one point, if you had some sort of a business relationship with this person, you have implied consent to contact them until they press that unsubscribe button. Expressed consent, which, apologies, that should be expressed consent there, is written or oral agreement to receive a specific type of message from your company. Meaning they subscribed via a form on a website. They sent you an email saying, please subscribe me to your newsletter list. Or you ask them in a meeting if they want to subscribe. That is all expressed consent. Let's go through some real world examples to help better explain this. So Hannah purchases shoes online from your company on August 1st. Your checkout process includes getting your customer's email address. That is implied. So Hannah didn't necessarily express that she wanted to be on the newsletter, but because she provided her information to the website, it was implied consent. Now, to be perfectly clear, this is under CASL's law. Recently, the GDPR came out, which I'm getting into just a bit of a discussion about, and I do have some additional links for everybody to review, but that is Europe's version of CASL, and they have more checks that a business have to go through. So that's why a lot of the emails you may see now could be a little bit different than what you see for CASL specifically. This is just what Canada requires, but if you are going to be working or sending content or working or building a newsletter list with people potentially from Europe and the UK, or of course the UK, from Europe, you do need to make sure that you are following GDPR. So I do have some additional resources in the folder to make sure that you guys have what you need in order to look into it further if you ever get to that point. But just for this class, we just talk about CASL because that's really important when you're working in Canadian businesses. So Julian buys a membership at Good Life Fitness and gives his email address as part of the application. This is also implied. Good Life could contact him with commercial messages or consumer messages. Keon signs up for event updates from your company at EventCon using the paper sign-up form at your booth. That is expressed consent. So you have your booth, there's a stack of papers, and it says, do you want to be updated by our company? Yes or no. And then they provide their information. Mila signs up for all communications from Home Depot directly on their website. Expressed consent. Once again, so she went through the process of saying, yes, I want to be contacted with newsletters and updates from Home Depot. So we're going to have our discussion, of course, like we do every week, but please let me know if implied or expressed consent is at all unclear. Definitely go through the additional resources, though. They're not, this week they're required. You do need to review them and then complete the quiz, but they also do help, illuminate the differences. But I still, of course, want to hear that you guys get it. If you have any more questions, please let me know. We can go through examples together. Whatever you need, just keep me updated. So, expressed consent. This means that there must be an opt-in mechanism. So, the example that from this last slide, Mila signing up for all communications from the Home Depot website, that's an example of an opt-in mechanism. You have a form on the website, Mila fills in her contact information, and then she's opt-in to subscribe to this newsletter. But you cannot send an email to obtain express consent unless you already have implied consent, because that email is considered a CEM. So if your engagement with a person does not fall into any of the examples of implied consent, which you can see here, you cannot send them an email asking for expressed consent. They cannot be contacted through a CEM. Express consent lasts until the recipient asks to be removed. So once somebody has expressed consent with you at that to receive your CEMs, at that point, they're essentially like a subscriber for life until they press that unsubscribe button. So that's why the opt-out mechanism is really important, because there needs to be a clear opportunity for them to opt out of communication with you. And they have to be able to unsubscribe from texts or emails. So let's get into the specifics of this unsubscribe. The CASL has set out within it acceptable unsubscribe mechanisms. So a CEM sent via SMS stating that a user can unsubscribe by texting the word unsubscribe. That was like the example I gave earlier. Very clear instruction. There's no loopholes. There's no sign-in that needs to happen. There's no calling anybody. You just have to reply with the word unsubscribe. The next example, a hyperlink included in an email that allows the user to unsubscribe by clicking it. Again, it has to be a very simple mechanism. No loopholes, no sign-ins, no additional issues trying to contact somebody, no additional questions. It has to be that they click this link and they can unsubscribe, just like that. A hyperlink included an email that links the user to a web page preference center where they can unsubscribe from receiving all or some types of CEMs from the sender. So this is if you're working with a business that has multiple types of communications. An example would be Toronto Life. They have multiple newsletters. There's their general newsletter. They have the food related, the drinking related, the events related. So if you go to click unsubscribe from one of those, it brings you to a web page that acts as a preference center, and then people can select which they want to keep subscribing to and which they no longer want to keep subscribing to. So in that case, one additional question is legal and is acceptable because this person could have been subscribed to multiple newsletters. What counts as unacceptable? Any mechanism that requires the user to log in to carry out the unsubscribe request. So that's why working with tools like MailChimp, for example, and many others do this, are extremely helpful because they already have the mechanism in there to receive the information if somebody presses unsubscribe. If somebody has to sign into a website in order to unsubscribe, that is not CASL compliant. It has to be that they click this button and it either immediately unsubscribes or it takes them to a preference center where they can set what they prefer. 10 days is the maximum time frame to implement an unsubscribe request. So depending on the tool that you're using, and this is why tools are great, it will do this automatically. Once it receives this unsubscribe request, this person's pulled from the list. If you are forced to work in a manual fashion, you need to work on removing this person within 10 days. And that's why the documentation of this person unsubscribing is very important, and that your systems and checks and balances are very organized. If you have to work in a manual system where for some reason due to privacy issues internally, they don't want you working with a tool, which is actually, I have a client that has to function this way. The system that they have in place it's very clear at the bottom. It says, please reply to this email saying unsubscribe if you wish to unsubscribe. That is considered CASL compliant. They only have to do one step to unsubscribe. At that point, my client then has to, within 10 days, remove that person's contact info from the list. So see why that 10 days is important? Is if you're not working with a tool, you have to be responsible to remove them from the list. It's not like a dangling time frame. It has to be within the 10 days. The penalties, which are no fun. Financially, the maximum payment for an individual is $1 million, and the maximum payment for a business is $10 million. So if you are an individual working for yourself, let's say self-employed, that's that max payment that you would pay. Or you were consulting on behalf of another business and you chose to make these decisions. But the max payment for a business an established business would be $10 million. The other potential ramifications: a court order to cease activity, publication of a notice of violation, settlements, and imprisonment. The CRTC and any other body involved, one of the penalties, or something that is not a penalty, is they can't take away your business license. You'll get fined, you'll have these other ramifications. They can never affect your business license. They can't take that away from you. So your business could still be established even though you broke, even though you were not CASL compliant. So the bottom line here: err on the side of express consent whenever possible. Period. End of story. So when we look back at this implied consent section here, what's become almost like an industry standard is to get a double opt-in, because then you have the clear record that this person has expressed consent. Nobody can ever question that. That can never come into question by either party. So I personally recommend to everyone I work with and to all of you, when you can get express consent, I definitely recommend it. Okay? Use a professional email marketing tool to help with compliance. We're going to get into those, and I'm really excited to, but there's so much that they do for specifically this one area that can really help make sure that you're not going to get yourself into trouble, that it makes them worth it. And MailChimp in particular is very affordable. Definitely look into it, and we're going to look into it next week anyway, but it's such an affordable option that I recommend everybody try and use them if you can. Focus on quality over quantity. So this works in multiple ways. In one way, it's speaking to the subscribers on your list. So if you're aiming for a smaller list of people that are more likely to convert and buy the product you're selling or the service you're selling, then that means you can take better care to make sure that you are being CASL compliant, because you're being more focused on a smaller list of people. It's great to have a massive subscriber list, but if you're doing it in ways that you are ignoring CASL compliance just to get to say you have this number, it could get you into trouble later. So, take on what you can chew and make sure that you're being CASL compliant. Grow a well-targeted list for better performance. And just like I mentioned, focus on less people and communicating with less people so you make sure that you are CASL compliant. Oh, and then the other piece for my last point was that even your communications to people, don't overdo it, don't oversend them, don't basically bait them into having a reason to report you. Focus on quality communication with these people, building, honest relationships between them and the brand, and you will see that it'll be a lot easier for you, and you'll be able to better focus on that compliance. So let's talk about the quiz. So I have a link in the presentation here. Also, within the Google Drive folder, there's this document here that you can open up, and this is the link to the quiz on SurveyMonkey. All of the answers to the quiz can be found in the presentation and can also definitely be found in the required reading. The quiz is only 15 questions long. It shouldn't take you longer than a half hour. And it's not meant to trick people. It's meant to make you feel confident in CASL compliance, that you can speak to it, and that you have, a base understanding to jump off of from there. I just want to go through the additional resources too. The required reading this week is about CASL by MailChimp, which is really great. Because it speaks to what they've implemented in their tool, but also they've just done a really good job of breaking it down. There's also MailChimp's post about double opt-in. So like we talked about earlier, really taking the opportunity to have it documented that this person wants to hear from you. CASL FAQs from the CRTC, which is great to go to the source to understand, based on what they're saying, how this works. And then also the Canadian Marketing Association has some really great resources for CASL. I also have some links here for email marketing tools you guys can take a look at for this week to, poke around in. But then I also just want to end off this class with a bit of a discussion about GDPR. It did just come out very recently. and I just want everyone to get a bit of an introductory discussion, so that you feel like you are aware of what it is, and you are prepared if you're going to be doing any work with citizens of the European Union. So the GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation, and it is new privacy rules that change the way businesses collect information online. And it took effect, in May, and it affects any company with dealings with the European Union, not just those based in Europe. So in the same way that CASL applies to anybody that is trying to collect the data of citizens in Canada, that's essentially the same rule of thumb for the GDPR. It's a very similar concept. It's, privacy laws and data collection laws. Many companies are looking to use GDPR as their standard internationally. So they're not just limiting it to their dealings with the EU. They're saying internationally, this is going to be the standard that we have set. So what I recommend is reading the two articles just to get a brief understanding. It's incredibly similar to CASL, but actually significantly better at the same time. They put in additional data protections, and it's going to many analysts out there, they think that this is the best first step to making the internet actually better for privacy laws overall. Because up until the last couple of years, it was more of like a Wild West in terms of what you could be doing. So I definitely recommend everybody read about the GDPR also, but the focus for the quiz specifically is on CASL. So all you need to do, is review the deck, review it a few times on your own and go through and review the required reading over here, and then go ahead and fill out the quiz. You have until August 10th to complete the quiz. Like I said, it should only take a half hour. It's really meant to just make sure you feel comfortable and confident talking about it. It's not meant to be like tricking you. It's meant to make you feel confident, okay? So once again, if anybody has any questions about anything we learned this week, please let me know. You can shoot me an email or in the discussion board, whatever you need. And I'm looking forward to getting more into email marketing next week. It's going to be really great. Thanks, everybody.